This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everybody. Fergus Dolan here from NALA. You're very welcome to our webinar this morning on understanding dyslexia. We're delighted to have Caoimhe O'Malley. Caoimhe is the Senior Adult Dyslexia Coordinator at the Dyslexia Association of Ireland, and she's been joined by her colleague Leah DeLacy. Leah is the Adult Dyslexia Coordinator. So I'll hand over to you, Caoimhe, and all the best.
Perfect. Thank you, Fergus. So, thank you everybody for attending the webinar, and thank you to Nala and Fergus for inviting us here to deliver this talk this morning. As Fergus noted, my name is Caoimhe O'Malley and I'm the Senior Adult Dyslexia Coordinator. You've probably received our slides in advance of this session. So my contact details and Leah's contact details are on those slides. So please feel free to get in touch at any stage, you know, whether it's in relation to this webinar or maybe something different that you're encountering in the workplace. And just to note throughout the session, while I'll be delivering the session, Leah's going to be in the chat box. So if you've got any questions, comments, anything like that, please feel free to put them into the chat box and we can answer them throughout. And also we're hoping to have time at the end for questions and answers. So if your preference is to verbalise your questions, we'll hopefully have time for that. Okay, perfect. Leah, is there anything I missed there before I start sharing?
No, I don't think so. I think you've covered everything. So Caoimhe's in the hot seat today, so she'll be taking the lead. And again, as you said, I'll be in the chat box during it. So any questions, pop your questions in there and we'll answer them as we go. Thanks a million.
Perfect. Thanks, Leah. So now I'm just going to share a few different little screens to share from. Yeah. So just to note, as we mentioned earlier, there is our email addresses, and feel free at any stage to get in touch with us. Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is to open mentimeter.com, okay, and insert the code. So it's 24004629. And I might ask Leah just to throw that in the chat box, just yeah. So we have a reference point. Okay, now I'm going to start sharing. So into this, when we've opened up our Mentimeter, there's going to be the question. And it's, when I say dyslexia, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Okay, don't think too much about this, just literally dyslexia and what comes to mind. And remember, there is no right or wrong answer here. And we're not looking for a definition on dyslexia. It's just those kind of first thoughts when we think of dyslexia, what comes to mind. So I'm going to stop sharing this slide for a moment. I'm going to pull up my Mentimeter. Now, fingers crossed, this works. Okay, perfect. Now, slides. Scramble, confusion, difficulty, scatter. I can't read. Innovative, yeah. Learning disability, yes. Yeah, mixing up letters, spelling. Panic and worry, yes. They're extremely important as educators to be aware of. Okay, lack of confidence, yeah. And we're going to touch on all of these kind of throughout the session, the different feelings that can accompany dyslexia, and especially if somebody hasn't been identified with dyslexia or has received a late identification of dyslexia, it does increase maybe somebody's anxiety or worry or frustration, but also their confidence. It can negatively impact on somebody's self-esteem and confidence. Okay, so perfect. So thank you everybody for sharing there. And while, yeah, we have some difficulties highlighted around dyslexia, and we do have some positives, some strengths around dyslexia. And as I said, there is no right or wrong answer. And while it's incredibly important to be aware of the difficulties that are associated with dyslexia, and we need to be aware of these so we are supporting our dyslexic learners. But it's also incredibly important to be aware of all of the strengths that come with being dyslexic, because as educators, you need to be aware of the strengths, because this is what you need to play to. When we're thinking of putting in reasonable accommodations, adjustments in place, when we're thinking of creating resources, we need to be aware of the strengths of dyslexia so we can play to these strengths. And this is how we can ensure that we raise somebody's self-esteem. We're also, this can help achieve success, but also equal access to the curriculum. So yeah, thank you for sharing there. So I'm going to stop sharing there for a moment, and I'm going to go back over to my slides. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now what we're going to do is 2 simulations, and these simulations are trying to give you a sense of what it's like to be dyslexic, right? What goes on behind the scenes under the surface, okay? And this is incredibly important to be aware of. So our first simulation is a reading simulation. So what's going to happen is I'm going to put up 1 page of an article on the screen, and you're going to have just under a minute to read that article. And then I'm going to change over my slide, and another article is going to appear on the screen. The exact same process. You will have just under a minute to read the article, and then we'll come back to the larger group and just discuss what happened, or if anything happened. Okay, so I'm just going to start my timer. Perfect. Okay, on our just less than a minute, and it starts now. Perfect. And our time's up. Okay, so now page 2 of our article, and our time starts now. Perfect, and our time's up. Now, into the chat box, because it's a large group, it'd be easier if we have our responses via the chat box. Okay, so for many of you, I'm taking it that when I put up page 1 of that simulation and I asked you guys to read, it was a very natural process. We just read. We comprehended the page, its contents. There wasn't too much pressure and anxiety, right? But I'm wondering, was this the same for the second page of the article? Was it a straightforward process? Did you just read? Did I put up on the screen, you read and you comprehended that text, and now you would feel comfortable or confident if I was to ask any questions? I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, don't worry. But I'm just wondering, how are we feeling? Switched off.
Second, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry.
No, go.
I know. Oh, sorry. Is it chat? I growing here. It was very difficult, very stressful.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, and that's what other people are saying there. There was strategies for the first article. It was skimming and scanning. Some people switched off during the second article, and it was that idea of giving up. Yeah, it is really difficult, and sometimes this is what you might find with your dyslexic individuals, that there is a sense that you're thinking they just gave up. They didn't really try. But if something is so incredibly difficult and you've had years of these difficulties, we can see why sometimes people say it's just too hard. I can't do it. Okay, second article, terrible. Stressful to read, upsetting to consider that people experience, trying to read like this. Second article was difficult. Some people saying it's impossible. Yeah, some people saying both had their difficulties. Yeah. Yeah, so some people were trying to put in strategies in the second article, but it was still remained really difficult. And think about the time element. We're asking you to create these strategies in a really short space of time. That can be difficult, and dyslexic individuals are constantly trying to come up with strategies and techniques. And if we don't allow them time to create these strategies, to practice these strategies, they are going to be at a disadvantage. We're going to knock their confidence. Yeah, this is a really important point that somebody put in there. The font was difficult in both documents, and this is important. And I've sent you guys on our dyslexia kind of friendly style guides. And sometimes this is what people forget. They might photocopy, a resource, or photocopy a page out of a book or an article out of a book, and that's what we're going to read and discuss. But if we're dyslexic, there can be visual difficulties. So, if the font isn't dyslexia friendly, if it isn't large enough, if sometimes, people have photocopied a page to death nearly, and it's half faded and it's in and out. So sometimes that can be extremely difficult. That is another kind of added difficulty that we're giving a dyslexic individual. So we do have to be very aware of how we're presenting our documents and how we're presenting our information, and ensure that it is a dyslexia friendly document that we've created. We don't want to add any more difficulties or barriers to somebody's education. Okay, people talking about how stressful it was. Yeah, and brilliant. Someone else said font's too small. Okay, perfect. Now, guys, how did you feel during that task? And I know some people have noted how they felt, stressed and things like that, and wanting to give up, that they found it was quite impossible. It was just too difficult. Yeah, so fantastic people who are saying, yeah, under pressure. An eye-opening, quite shocking. Yeah. Isolated, yeah. Okay, that's fantastic. And that's been put in there about the time element, that dread of a time element. And this is something we hear a lot, and we hear from dyslexic individuals in all areas, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in learning environments. That time element, once it's introduced, adds a huge amount of pressure to somebody. Straight away, your dyslexic individuals, oh my God, I have less than a minute. I have to try and read this. Oh, they're going to ask me questions. What if they ask me this question and I can't answer? What if I can't read this text? All of this is going through their mind, and it's heightened and emphasized when we put in these time restrictions, which does mean that if this is what we're concentrating on when we're trying to interact with materials, we're not truly interacting with the material. We're not comprehending. We're not really learning if all of this is going on in the background. Okay, really interesting. Someone said, embarrassed that I couldn't keep up. Yeah, this is really, really common. Feelings that many dyslexic individuals will discuss maybe later in life or will encounter. It's that idea of embarrassing. You're looking around a learning environment or a workplace, and it looks like everybody else is interacting with this material. Everyone else can do this, bar me. And there is that embarrassment that as an adult, you can't read with enough fluency to gain comprehension, that you are decoding words, at maybe kind of, at what we might expect around a primary school or a secondary school student. That can cause a huge amount of embarrassment, but also it does knock your self-esteem and confidence.
Sorry, Caoimhe, there's a nice one there, stopped breathing. I think it's a really interesting one, just to show the effect on how that anxiety is affecting your engagement with the material. Very, very descriptive there. Yeah,
fantastic. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Leah. Okay, super. So thank you everyone for sharing there. That was fantastic insight. So the aim of that simulation is to try and show you that when somebody has to slow down enough to decode possibly every word in a passage or numerous words in a passage, right, it can make it really difficult to read with enough fluency to gain comprehension, right? So this means that for dyslexic individuals, they may have to do a lot of rereading. sometimes they have to introduce, different strategies, techniques into place. They might be using assistive technology to help maybe with some of their reading and comprehension. So here, and this can cause a huge amount of frustration, stress, and anxiety, but it's also really tiresome, right? It takes up a huge amount of effort and energy. And we would hear dyslexic individuals talking about physical pain while they're trying to read, that their head actually hurts. Okay, and this is important to note. And this again is why we're talking about, we have to give our dyslexic individuals time, right? We shouldn't be presenting, documents spur of the moment and saying to somebody, okay, read that and now we're going to discuss that. Or, asking somebody who hasn't been able to interact with the material in any way to start trying to read it. Because think about it, it can cause a huge amount of embarrassment, but also the anxiety. And then somebody leaves that day, they have to come back the next day knowing, that they haven't been able to read, that they have felt embarrassed and belittled by the task. But also the self-esteem and confidence has been knocked again, right? So it can be very difficult to return to the learning environment the following day after maybe these negative experiences. And it's important to note when we're talking about how much time and effort and energy a dyslexic individual uses when they're trying to decode, when they're trying to read. Research shows that a dyslexic brain works 5 times harder than the non-dyslexic brain when we're trying to read. So it is important to note your students, your learners, they are trying so incredibly hard. They are working so hard, right? We have to be aware of this. We have to acknowledge this. Okay, so now I want to do a writing simulation. And again, this is really important when we're thinking of a dyslexic individual. And if we just look at that cartoon strip at the top, this is something that our dyslexic individuals talk about so much. They refer to this. It's this idea. They have all these wonderful thoughts, ideas, maybe very strong verbal skills. But when they're asked to put that down on paper, it's extremely difficult. And sometimes they can't do it, or sometimes to avoid maybe all of the stress and the challenges, they won't write what they really want to write. So if we think of this student here who's been asked to write what they did for the summer, right? And he's thinking, I'm never going to be able to do all of that. So in the end, what he produces is a piece of writing that says he just watched TV for the summer. Okay, because sometimes that to kind of as self-preservation to help the dyslexic individual maybe to master difficulties or to not step too far into the difficulties, this is what can happen. So now we're going to try this writing simulation and ask you all to grab a pen and paper there. So similar to the reading simulation, what's going to happen is I'm going to put up a task on the screen, and we're going to have just under a minute to read the instructions, comprehend the instructions, and complete the task. And then we're going to move on to task 2. Same thing, less than a minute to comprehend, to read the instructions, to comprehend, and to complete the task. And then we'll come back to the chat box and see how we got on. Okay, perfect. So task 1 is coming up now, and our time has started. Super. Now we're going to go on to task 2, same thing, and our time starts now. Perfect. And our time is up. So again, into the chat box. Okay. When we were writing our first paragraph, again, was that quite a natural response? You know, I asked, what did you do this morning? And, you know, for many, they didn't even think, what did I do this morning? It was so natural that you just wrote down what you did this morning. And you have this lovely paragraph that you would probably feel confident sharing with the group, or letting somebody else maybe see what you've written. But is that the same for the second paragraph? Do you all have these wonderful paragraphs that you feel that you would feel confident sharing, or letting somebody to read and to see? Exercise 1 was natural. I didn't even manage a full sentence. Yep. Thank you, Grania. Don't worry, most people will say, I've got 4 words for the second task. Caoimhe, I have this amazing paragraph 1, and the second one I have 4. So yeah, it's designed to be difficult, but it does reflect all of the difficulties that a dyslexic individual encounters, but also their thinking. What you know, all the thoughts that go in, the work, the effort, the energy that goes into creating a piece of writing. The second one was too much instructions. Yeah, and that's what, yes, yeah, and that's what we're saying. By the time you've nearly read the instructions and comprehended them, your time is up. But think about, for a dyslexic individual, for so many of them, this is what's happening. Okay, without these instructions, you might not be able to get a true sense of what can happen for a dyslexic individual. We'll often see, have you ever seen somebody who has these fantastic verbal skills, that their vocabulary is rich, and then they paint these amazing pictures, but yet they might produce a piece of written work, and it's a very maybe immature vocabulary, it's very basic vocabulary. Sometimes for a dyslexic individual, this is what happens when we ask them to write. They may not know how to spell the words that they can verbalize quite easily. They may not be sure whether they're using them correctly. They're not sure of their punctuation and maybe their grammar and things like that. So what happens is they tend to go back to very basic language, but also we're thinking about, okay, does that word fit into that sentence? Or it's that idea of, oh God, I don't know how to spell that word. Hang on, I have to find a different word. They find a different word and they realize, oh no, that doesn't fit with the sentence. Now the grammar's off in the sentence. I have to start that whole sentence again to try and accommodate one word. So it's really can be really difficult. Imagine trying to read those instructions with dyslexia. Yeah, that's again, Aoife, thank you for pointing that out. This idea about reading instructions, trying to comprehend instructions and follow those instructions as a dyslexic individual can be very difficult. And we've seen this. God, sometimes we get sent over some, you know, instructions around maybe exam papers or essay papers, you know, and they are so difficult that really you're halfway through and you're going, hang on, what is it they were asked to do? There is, you know, so we do have to be very mindful. We're talking about education in general, right? Let's not try and trip people up, you know. Let's do, you know, a straightforward question, you know, and we should try and avoid all of these kind of multiple steps and things like that. Yeah, it's a great point. Be straight, you know, clear and concise. Okay, fantastic. Someone said, yeah, trying to follow those instructions, I thought my mind was going to explode. Thanks for sharing there. Yeah, that can be really difficult. When we see with dyslexia later on, we're going to see, you know, the short-term and working memory difficulties that some dyslexic individuals may have. And this does mean following instructions can be extremely difficult. And sometimes that can be misunderstood. It's never that the individual just couldn't be bothered, that they're not listening, or they just weren't bothered, you know, to complete all the tasks that were asked of them. Sometimes with these difficulties, they've genuinely forgot, you know, that all of the steps or all of the instructions that were asked. And by the time they're on instruction 3, they may have forgotten what instruction 1 was. Okay, steps and sequencing can be an issue. Yeah, you're right. Okay, perfect. So now just very quickly, how did you guys feel the second paragraph? Anybody feel, looking down at their work there, that it's a true reflection of their intelligence and abilities? No, yeah. So people don't, yeah. And this is what, definitely not. I felt overwhelmed. Now, think about a dyslexic individual. This is something that they talk to us. You know, all the time. It's this idea of no matter how hard we work, we put 100% into our written work, but it doesn't pay off. We don't get the grades or the recognition that we deserved. People are just maybe, looking over, okay, your grammar's incorrect, you spelt that incorrect. They may not understand the point that you're trying to make, okay? And again, this impacts on somebody's self-esteem and confidence. Can you imagine year in, year out being in our education system, and every time you submit your work, it's never that true reflection. It doesn't reflect your grades, your feedback from your educator doesn't reflect all of the work that you put in, all of the effort that's going on behind the scenes under the surface. None of that is reflected. What somebody is looking at is, you spelt that wrong. That sentence isn't complete. That sentence doesn't make sense, right? And then this is reflected in your grades. It's reflected in your feedback. And this is something that unfortunately our dyslexic individuals encounter, day in, day out, year after year in the education system, and it's this idea that for so many, and you'll know yourself as educators, so many of your learners have encountered this type of an education system. It's the banking style of education. And we know Pablo Freire identified this in the early 70s, the negative impact, the damage that a banking style of education does to an individual, and at that time he was offering alternatives. And now, thankfully, we're starting to move towards those alternatives. We're seeing UDL being introduced across kind of all levels of education, but it's a very slow process. Think about your learners. They may not have encountered these changes. What they've encountered is the banking style of education, which doesn't cater for diversity. It doesn't cater for your dyslexic individuals. It tends to cater for one kind of type or style of learner, and it's that, it's designed for your average student. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to read out a poem. This poem was written by Keith Murphy. Okay, Keith was identified late in life with dyslexia. So he wrote this poem, and he very kindly, with his permission, I'm allowed to share it. Keith, since he was in the workplace and following an accident, he returned to education, and he highlights this throughout the poem about being identified with dyslexia, the change, what it did to him, that kind of powerful relabeling. Okay, so just one moment, I'm just going to stop sharing that and pull up my poem. Okay, super. Can everyone see that? Yeah. Super. Okay, so he noted it: seen but unseen. Sit down, shut up, you're dumb, said my secondary school teacher. You'll end up a bum. I actually believed I was dumb, and that's why into our French class I could not come. Now, many of you are going to be, listening to these words, and you're going to be thinking of your learners. I guarantee you can relate to different things, maybe experiences, what people have said. But it is important that sometimes people don't say what their past experience, they don't say what's kind of going on under the surface behind the scenes. This poem sums it up. It's that idea of, I actually believed I was dumb. If we have been through an education system that doesn't cater for neurodiversity, right, that it's going to end up reinforcing those negative thoughts that somebody can start to have. So by the time maybe somebody's leaving school, or depending, they may leave, after primary school, after whenever they leave, a lot of time, if dyslexia hasn't been identified, unfortunately, they are leaving feeling that they are stupid, feeling that they are dumb, thinking that they are a failure. Okay, so it's that idea: if I stayed in school, they will say I'm a fool, so I'll get a job and earn a few bob. The trenches are dark and also deep. Just below the trench line, my head I must keep. To what was said, I really did care, so never again would I put myself out there. It's incredibly important. We find this with many individuals, especially who've had a late identification in dyslexia in life. It's this idea that for self-preservation, to protect themselves, they hide so much of themselves. They won't step outside their comfort zone. They find a job that they're good at, that they can do all of the tasks in it. They don't tend to go maybe for promotion. They don't tend to maybe go back into education. They just try to blend in kind of to the background. They don't want people to notice. And this is incredibly important. To what was said, I really did care. Sometimes our dyslexic individuals, again, for self-preservation, put up this front: I don't care. Your words don't hurt me. It doesn't bother me. But underneath it all, it does. It hurts and it cuts to the core the words that we use. It's incredibly important as educators. We are aware of the power of words because they can be so damaging. And this idea for Keith that because he was so hurt by his educator's response to his difficulties and his challenge in the workplace, to protect himself, was, I'm not putting myself out there. I am not going to step outside my comfort zone. So I left school convinced I was a fool and entered the workplace where they used a tool. Call it fate or call it luck, but an accident forced me back to the book. A computer course with office skills, this adult learning is giving me some thrills. From level 3, 5 and 4 to Maynooth University, they opened the door. However, all the while the struggle got greater. It was a constant battle not to say see you later. Where are you being or is it been? I was over there or is it there? Where or where? Oh, I just don't care. And it's this idea that sometimes even when a dyslexic individual is having success, these difficulties and battles are still going on behind the scenes. And this idea of, battling not to leave the courses because it's so difficult. And for many of your learners, this is what's going on. And sometimes, they're leaving, they're going, that's just too hard. I can't go back in tomorrow. Sometimes they're trying to push themselves to go back in, but there is behind the scenes that constant battle. So we have to be aware of this. We don't want somebody to, to leave their education, after they've come back to education. So we have to be aware of what's going on for someone. I write, but it still looks like shite. I try, yet I still feel like the dumb boy. And this again, because his dyslexia hasn't been identified, there's no reasonable accommodations, there's no supports in place, and it's reinforcing that negative dialogue that was introduced to him as a young child in primary school, that he just wasn't good enough. It didn't matter what he did, how hard he worked, he was always going to be that dumb child. Remember the trenches where they hid the imposters? It takes all my efforts not to return to the fosters. And this idea where they hid the imposters, many adults with dyslexia will talk about the imposter syndrome. Even when they're having success, there is that fear of, oh my God, the educator made a mistake. They didn't really read my work. They thought I was a different student. At any point, they're going to figure out that I'm stupid. I can't do this work, and I'm going to get kicked off this course. So we have to, be aware of this and be positively reinforcing. So I feel so stupid and my head, it can hurt. At times, I wish I could bury it in the dirt. She said to me, get your head out of the sand, all will be grand. Let's take a test. It'll be for the best. The test says dyslexia. Is that why I'm shite? Reading the report helps turn on a light. Like leaving a tunnel, it's suddenly bright. The piece of paper says I'm neither dumb, stupid or shite. This dyslexia I've got has stirred up the pot. It's a gift I've been handed to become a learning bandit. That's incredibly important. We're talking about the importance of identifying dyslexia. For years, Keith never had an answer or a name for any of his difficulties. He just thought it was him. He wasn't good enough. He was just, wasn't capable of education, wasn't teachable. Okay, but whereas an educator starts to query dyslexia, discuss dyslexia with them, and through the identification, this allowed him to change that script, to change that inner dialogue from, hang on, I am not stupid, I am not dumb, I'm dyslexic, I learn differently, but I can learn. Okay, when I was young, school was no fun. I was just bold because I couldn't do how I was told. But now as an adult, this learning is fun. Feels like I've stepped out of the night into the sun. This is because my diagnosis is a gift that has ended my constant internal rift, right? This fantastic poem, it sums everything up, but it's this idea that when we identify dyslexia, some people would talk about it's nearly like being reborn. It's like, hang on, I can do anything I want to do. And Keith has been so successful. Like he's talking about, starting at QQI level 3, and he is currently going to submit his PhD. He's also a lecturer. But think about it. Whereas if we think back to a few years when he started his journey, it was this idea, he wanted to run out the door. He thought he was stupid, but with the right support, with having his dyslexia identified, he realized, that he could achieve and have a huge amount of success in the workplace. So it is important, if we are thinking about dyslexia within our learners, that we do have that discussion with them. Okay, so perfect. Now, and again, you know, we're talking about knowing and being aware of the past experiences that people may have had, and especially somebody who hasn't had their dyslexia identified, right? Because they're going to bring these experiences into your educational settings, right? These, you know, ideas of being made feel stupid, you know, the shame of not being able to read out loud without stuttering or spelling, and the fear of being called upon by an educator. All of these things people are bringing into your classrooms. Okay, well, think about it. If this is where they're living, they're in, you know, filled with shame, anxiety, in the fear zone. It means they can't truly learn. We need to take people out of that fear zone into their comfort zone and into the learning zone. And this is where true learning takes place. Because what can happen? You're filled with fear, shame, anxiety. It means you're sitting in a learning environment. You're trying to come up with strategies. If the teacher asks me, this is what I'll do. If that's what your students are trying to figure out, they can't possibly be learning if they're trying to figure out what strategies to kind of protect themselves. And this is to protect themselves from having these experiences, negative educational experiences. So as educators, we need to be aware of what possibly has gone on in the past, and we need to make sure that we are not replicating those situations, that we are not getting somebody to relive these past experiences. They can be extremely traumatic. Okay, so sorry, could I just ask, could everyone mute themselves, please? Thank you. Okay, so at DAI, when we talk about dyslexia, what we say is dyslexia is a learning difference. It can cause difficulties with learning and work, and occurs on a spectrum, with people being mildly affected and others more severely. Okay, however, it is so incredibly important, with the right understanding, accommodations, interventions, and supports, people with dyslexia can have and will have success in education, in the workplace, in all aspects of their life. They have to first have their dyslexia identified, and then the supports and accommodations put in place, right? Everyone with dyslexia is different, but there is a commonality of difficulties, and these tend to be around reading, spelling, and writing, related to our cognitive and processing difficulties. Okay, the impact of dyslexia can change according to the environment. So again, when we're thinking about, you know, asking somebody to do something, under what circumstances? Like earlier, when people mentioned, when I put the time element into the reading, this heightened people's anxieties. You know, it did kind of change the scenario. These are the circumstances that we're talking about that can make our dyslexic difficulties more maybe pronounced or evident. Okay. So people with dyslexia, as we mentioned, have a huge amount of strengths, and many of these strengths they develop. It's due to their dyslexia. So we're talking about things like their determination, their ability to problem solve, their resilience. Okay, but it is really important to be aware that dyslexia does not automatically bring about special gifts or talents. And when I say this, I mean, like, sometimes what can happen is that we have this picture painted to us that dyslexia is a bed of roses, that we are shown, you know, the Richard Bransons, the Tom Cruises of this world, all these famous people who have achieved so much success, and they talk about their dyslexia being their gift, that they are millionaires, they're entrepreneurs because of their dyslexia. Okay, but for some people, they don't have that, you know, entrepreneurial skills. They may not have that success. So it's important that we're open and honest about dyslexia. It's not a bed of roses. It's not all sunshine and, you know, rainbows, and it doesn't automatically entitle, you know, an individual to have all of these special gifts. Dyslexia can be hard. It can be really difficult to be dyslexic. There's some days that you will give your right arm not to be dyslexic, while there's other days that you celebrate your dyslexia, you embrace it because everything goes right because of your dyslexia, because maybe of how you think or of what task you're being asked to do. So it's important that we are open and honest when we're talking about dyslexia, especially with our learners. Let's not paint this incorrect picture that may make then somebody think that they're a failure as a dyslexic because they don't have these amazing gifts or talents. Okay, but we have to be talking about dyslexia, but in an open, honest way, and we need to recognize and respect, you know, all individuals, but also the different individualism and varieties within our dyslexic individuals. Now, it's also really important to note that dyslexia is legally recognised as a disability under Irish and EU law. However, many dyslexic individuals don't consider themselves as being disabled, and we have to respect this. But again, it's important to note this. If you're asking people maybe to fill out forms, or we're talking about disclosure, you know, and around your disclosure is you're asking them, do you have a disability? If somebody doesn't know that dyslexia is a disability, or if somebody doesn't believe or consider themselves as being disabled, they're not going to tick that box. So we're not giving them a space to maybe disclose. So we have to be mindful of wording here. You know, maybe saying things like, you know, is there anything else that you feel we should know in order to support you to reach your full potential? Somewhere like this could be that option for somebody with dyslexia to disclose. Okay, in the past, there has been numerous different, you know, terminology and definitions around dyslexia. Sometimes you'll hear a learning disability, a specific learning difficulty, or a reading disorder. Okay, and we're trying to move away from this. We're trying to see dyslexia as a difference. Okay, it's not, you know, a negative. It's not something to be shameful. We want to remove any incorrect stigma that has been attached to the word dyslexia, to being dyslexic, and to, you know, discussing your dyslexia openly and honestly. Okay, so some people, when they're discussing dyslexia, have a preference around words, and this is sometimes what we're asked: is a person first or disability first? We at DAI believe, you know, that we need to respect the individual. Everybody is different. Some people prefer the wording, you know, a person with dyslexia, while others prefer a dyslexic person. So when you're working with somebody, you can, you know, listen to the wording that they use, reflect that back, you know, when you're talking to them. Okay, we need to respect that. Also, you might know when we're doing our talks, we tend to interchange our words, and again, this is just to reflect the different preferences out there. There isn't one right way or wrong way to, you know, note somebody with dyslexia. Right. So dyslexia comes from two Greek words. So we're talking dys, meaning difficulty or pain or trouble, and lexia, meaning language or words. So it's a difficulty with language. This can impact somebody's auditory processing, their reading, their writing, their spelling, and their speech. Now, most people, when they think of dyslexia, they do, okay, reading, writing, and spelling difficulties. Not everyone thinks of auditory processing, and not everyone thinks of speech. And when I'm talking about our auditory processing, this is really important, especially, you know, when we're talking about being in an educational setting. For somebody, this can be quite difficult. They have to put in a lot of strategies and techniques to try and ease these challenges. And these can be difficult. They can take a lot of time to maybe, you know, to get right, and for them to start to become natural. So I have to be aware, one that I see a lot of people using is, while they're trying to minimize all of the other senses that they're using, but they're also trying to minimize all of the other stimuli that is in the environment. It takes a huge amount of concentration, right? So what people tend to do is they may look away from you and they find a blank spot on the wall, and that's what they're concentrating on. So then they are just listening to what you're saying, and they're able to, you know, process it and comprehend and interact with it. But it's important as educators, you're aware somebody may be introducing this strategy, you know, and this is where sometimes incorrectly dyslexic individuals, you know, have been labeled daydreamers, they're lazy, they're disengaged, they just, you know, couldn't be bothered. No, they're putting in strategies to try and ease these challenges, and we shouldn't be highlighting them and, you know, singling them out and things like that. Okay. Also, when we're talking about speech, I don't necessarily mean a speech impediment or impairment. What I mean is, if you think dyslexia impacts somebody's phonological difficulty, so if we have, you know, a challenge around manipulation and blending of sounds and syllables, it can mean that you incorrectly blend your letters together and your syllables together. So therefore, you can mispronounce your words, and this sometimes can be embarrassing as an adult that we're mispronouncing words. So again, be really sensitive and mindful. Don't continually highlight, oh, you said that wrong. This is actually how the pronunciation of that word. Okay, be mindful here. Also around speech, the organization of thoughts. You might find a dyslexic individual sometimes can jump midway into a story, or maybe the sentence. They start at the second half of the sentence and then the first. And you're thinking, what? That isn't coherent, it isn't logical. And this again is why we need to be allowing our dyslexic individual time to organize their thoughts and ideas before they verbalize them. Okay, so just kind of some points. Dyslexia is lifelong and persistent. We do not grow out of dyslexia. And unfortunately, sometimes people think that they're going to grow out of it, they're going to overcome their dyslexia. No, we can ease our challenges with supports, with strategies and techniques, but unfortunately, we can't eradicate them. Dyslexia is a lifelong identification. Okay, it is not a general learning difficulty, so it does not impact somebody's IQ. There is no connection between IQ and dyslexia, and it's why at DAI, our educational psychologists don't automatically deliver IQ assessments and IQ testings unless it's in the best interest of the individual. Okay, but it is important to note that there is no link between IQ and dyslexia. Sometimes it can be dyslexic difficulties can be more easily spotted when other strengths are very apparent. So sometimes educators, we often hear educators talking about it's like we've two different students. In the classroom, the student, their knowledge and vocabulary is amazing, but however, when they produce their written work, it's like somebody else wrote it. It's like, where is all those wonderful thoughts and ideas that you shared in the class the week before? And that's sometimes that discrepancy, that's what can be triggered. Maybe is dyslexia, is this a dyslexic profile and things like that, and that's why it can be sometimes more evident. There is a genetic link, it runs in families. It's important to note it is not a disease, it's a difference. And this again is why you might hear I talk about an identification of dyslexia. We identify dyslexia, we shouldn't be diagnosing dyslexia. Diagnosing dyslexia makes it sound like it's a disease. It also makes it sound like, there's a tablet that you might be able to take and cure yourself of dyslexia. And also talking about a diagnosis tends to feed into the medical model of disability, which is quite negative. So we talk about an identification of dyslexia, and this again ties in with the more social model of disability. Extremely complex. About 10% of our population would have a dyslexic profile. And again, we find in the FET sectors, in adult literary sectors, that there is a huge, very high rates of unidentified dyslexic adults. So it's really important we're having this conversation. We know what to be looking out for. Self-esteem can be impacted. Okay, so remember, dyslexia occurs despite access to appropriate learning opportunities, and it's characterized by cognitive difficulties in phonological processing, working memory, speed of retrieval of information from your long-term memory. So we're talking about phonological processing. So somebody, this is your ability to manipulate and blend sounds and syllables correctly. Working memory, this is your ability to, again, be able to hold and manipulate information in your mind over a short period of time. For some dyslexic individuals, this can be difficult. And think about, if we deliver our instructions verbally to someone, so we're going to say, now you need to do A, B, and C. Your student may only remember C, or they may only remember B, but then they've genuinely forgotten the other two, okay? So here, how we can kind of maybe help ease these difficulties is to follow up any verbal instructions with, a voice note, with an email, with some maybe, pre-recorded, instructions list and things like that. This is so we're ensuring that our dyslexic individual has a blueprint, something they can refer back to make sure that they're completing all of the tasks and instructions that are asked of them. Speed of retrieval of information from long-term memory can be impacted. And this again is why we shouldn't be expecting an instant response. We shouldn't ask a question and expect that automatic response. And if somebody doesn't give it, we move on to the next individual. That again is going to knock someone's self-esteem and confidence. Think about it. You know the answer to the question, but it's just taking you a little bit longer to find the answer and to organize your response. So it will knock your self-esteem if the educator then has moved on to someone else while you're in the middle of doing this. So, the best thing you can give your dyslexic individuals is time. Okay, here's some common co-occurring difficulties. Again, we're not saying that everybody with dyslexia will have them, but they are very common. So talking about, you can have attention difficulties, sequencing difficulties. Again, this is around, you're organizing, let's say your letter sequencing, but also your speech, organizing your text and things like that can be difficult. Directional skills, sometimes judging the time can be difficult. So again, if you're going to, you're in your class and you're going to take a 5-minute break, you know, sometimes what will happen is somebody might say, oh, we'll take a break for a few minutes and regroup. For dyslexic individuals, that can be quite difficult. What's a few minutes? Sometimes they genuinely think they've only been gone for a few minutes and they come back 10, 20 minutes later. So again, think of a blueprint. We say it's 12 o'clock, we're taking a 5-minute break, we'll come back here at 12:05, whatever it is. Again, it's a blueprint somebody can refer back to. Okay, I have to be back there for 12:05. Sometimes spoken language and speech development can be impacted. We often see a lot of individuals as children with dyslexia will have had speech and language intervention. Okay, sometimes there can be difficulty planning, sequencing, organizing written text. Time management and organizational skills can be impacted. So again, around these different areas, there is a huge amount of assistive technology that can help here. And especially, you know, around time management and organizational skills. This can be really important for dyslexic individuals to try and develop good strategies and to implement these, because they are skills that we need, you know, whether in education, our personal life, or the workplace. So we do on our YouTube channel, Dyslexia Association of Ireland, have short little videos that discuss assistive technology that can help in relation to different areas that a dyslexic individual may find challenging. Okay, so again, huge amount of strengths. So we're talking about our dyslexic individuals tend to think differently. They see things differently because they see the big picture, the whole picture. They're outside the box thinkers. And they have then, as we mentioned earlier, developed very, very good problem solving skills, right? And this tends to have been because they haven't fitted into, let's say, the neat little box that our education system designed for students. So from a really, really young age, they've had to problem solve. So by the time we're seeing them as adults, this tends to be a skill that they have fine-tuned. Extremely creative. We see a huge amount of inventors, entrepreneurs with a dyslexic profile, right? Again, skills that a dyslexic individual person tends to develop is that they can be quite empathetic, hardworking, determined, resilient. You'll see this within your learners. That resilience, like, is sometimes it amazes me the resilience a dyslexic individual can develop. Okay, because being in the education system can be extremely difficult. Think about your talking in primary school, round robin reading. How you know, embarrassing, how damaging is that for a dyslexic individual to be randomly picked upon to read in front of their peers and their teachers, and then they incorrectly read and everybody laughs, right? But for a dyslexic individual, they have to come back the next day and face all of those people again. That can be really hard, okay? So we do have to acknowledge that. And when we do have to reward that, you know, learners are coming back day in, day out. And as we've seen with Keith in his poem, they're fighting, they're battling to come back into education. They don't want to walk back through those doors because of the past experience, because they don't know what lies behind those doors, because it is so hard and it can be emotionally draining. We're talking about, you know, this emotional roller coaster. For a dyslexic individual, it can be really, really hard. Okay, so again, if we're thinking about, you know, indicators of dyslexia in adults, and you want maybe a little checklist, or you want a starting point to have a conversation with yourself, or you want to maybe ask one of your learners to have a look at it. At DAI, we have, you know, a checklist on our website. But it's important to remember that no one is going to have all of these indicators, and also the number of indicators observed in an individual doesn't necessarily equal, you know, whether somebody's going to have mild, moderate, or severe dyslexia. Okay, this can just be a really good starting point. Okay, so now we want to move on to a scenario. Okay, so again, into the chat box, I'm going to read this out here and I'm going to ask some questions on it, okay? So Mary is an adult education tutor who has dyslexia. At times, Mary would collaborate with other colleagues and uses the centre canteen during her working day. On her lunch break, Mary overhears her colleague, who doesn't have dyslexia, describe having a dyslexic day because she's making spelling mistakes in her work. Her fellow colleague laughs along and agrees. How do you think Mary feels? Hearing, right, she's a dyslexic individual and she's in her staff canteen and she's after overhearing one of her colleagues maybe having, you know, describing themselves as having a dyslexic day, describing them, you know, sometimes people might feel like, you know, you're having a laugh at them. having many dyslexic individuals will say to you, I'd love just to have the odd dyslexic day, but I don't. Every day is a dyslexic day, and I can have these difficulties every day. So I'm going to pull up the chat box. Yeah, that's interesting. Shame. Yeah. Anything else anyone else is thinking that Mary might feel? Oh, sorry, there's more. Undermined, yeah, belittled, misunderstood. This is, yeah, really important. Yeah, self-conscious. And this is something that we see many educators will come and say, we have all these amazing supports in place for our dyslexic learners, right? We are open and honest about the challenges about, dyslexia, okay? And they'll say that's fantastic. But as an educator with dyslexia, I'm not supported and I don't feel I can disclose my dyslexia. And this sometimes is why, like this case recently where somebody said, I really need supports, Caoimhe, but I can't disclose. And it's because I've heard these kind of jeering or these remarks about having a dyslexic day because somebody has spelled something incorrectly, because somebody has mispronounced a word, and it feels like they're having, a laugh, and I don't feel confident or comfortable now disclosing. It's a huge dilemma. We have to be really mindful of this, the language that we use when we're discussing dyslexia, when we're discussing difficulties. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, somebody has said there, Mary may feel there's a lack of awareness among her colleagues. Sometimes there is, and I've seen this before, where people have said, oh, geez, yourself, Caoimhe, like the student, they're dyslexic. We'd be doing well if we get them to pass. And it's this idea that, a dyslexic individual can't excel, that they're not going to, get a really high grade. Let's just get them to the pass level, and, and that'll be fantastic. That is really insulting to also to hear as a dyslexic individual, but also think about the message that, when we use words like this, that we're sending out to everybody, to our students, to our colleagues, right? That's really, really negative. And we're also saying, that we don't think people with dyslexia can have success. And sometimes the awareness is working against. Sorry, Leah, you wouldn't just be able to pull up the chat box. I'm having difficulty with my chat box. I'm only seeing half of it and it keeps jumping. And just, you might tell me what's in the chat box rather than,
course.
yeah.
No
Sorry.
worries at all. It's hopping anyway. So a lot of people are saying they felt self-conscious, or Mary would feel self-conscious, social outcast, lack of awareness among her colleagues. Sometimes that awareness is working against genuine understanding.
Yeah.
It's sometimes that it's something that an adult education tutor is not expected to have. There's a general lack of understanding of what it's like to be dyslexic. To be fair, it's not an easy condition to understand. A sense of inferiority as well.
Yeah.
And that's what Mary is feeling.
That idea when we're saying, sorry, about it's not, maybe an easy difference to be aware of or to fully understand. Yes, and we're saying there's no experts in any of these kind of differences or difficulties, but at the same time, we need to be aware, we need to hold ourselves responsible. We, over what we say and what we do, our actions, our words can deeply impact somebody, and they often say, in the power of words, you can destroy somebody with them or you can build somebody up. So being aware and mindful that, sometimes laughing at somebody because they're spelling things wrong, or laughing at somebody describing having a dyslexic day, can be really hurtful for someone else. But it's also that message that we're sending out. What are we saying behind these, and how is somebody interpreting that? Okay, so perfect. So I'm going to jump to, I can't just time, so I want to jump to scenario 4, because I think this won't be very relevant. Scenario 3. Okay. So Sarah is an ESOL teacher working with a student who is originally from Poland. The student has been living in Ireland for 6 years and had completed her secondary school education. Sarah is unsure whether the student has difficulties with literacy or if there may be indicators of dyslexia. right? So what are we thinking here? How should Sarah maybe approach this situation, and what indicators for dyslexia maybe could we be looking at when we're looking at ESOL students? Something coming in, and this is something that I think many times we oh, go on, yeah.
Would you begin by explaining what dyslexia is? Sarah could use the checklist on your website.
Yeah. That's important, having, you know, that understanding of dyslexia, having a conversation
Talk with
with
the student, that's
somebody.
another one.
Yeah, brilliant. And we're talking about sometimes not just maybe around literacy difficulties, but we're also not just, okay, literacy difficulties with English. We're looking at, okay, you know, in your native language, was there difficulties around, you know, your spelling, around your reading, around your writing, things like that, you know, because then that is an indicator if these difficulties and the kind of they're presenting as dyslexia, if they were present, you know, when she was studying in Poland within her native language, and now when she's in Ireland and studying English, if these are both present and consistent, you know, in both languages, that can be another indicator.
Yeah, that's similar to what's being said in the chat box at the minute. So some have said they've had experience themselves when working in guidance with adults, very difficult. And then, like you said, Caoimhe, a lot of the feedback here is to speak with the student and see how she's feeling, find out about the early learning experiences, and see if they have problems in their native language.
Brilliant.
And then spelling rules are so different in different languages. So
God,
talking about it might be a start.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're also talking about opportunities for learning. So even though this student has been in Ireland for 6 years, we need to see, you know, what opportunities has she been fully immersed within, let's say, the English language, you know, or is it sometimes maybe that all of her friends are Polish, so at home they're speaking Polish, you know, maybe where she's working, there's a lot of people that speak in Polish, so the only time maybe she's interacting with, you know, English is when she's coming to you, or maybe some small snippets within her, you know, past education. So, you know, we have to be very mindful of different opportunities around learning. Also, another great one is around any difficulties that we kind of associate with dyslexia that are non-literacy difficulties. So we're talking about how is their organizational skills, how is their time management, how maybe is their direction skills, their you know, attention difficulties, things like that, their working memory, right? These difficulties can be, you know, present regardless of what somebody's first language is. And this again can be another kind of good indicator whether we're looking at, you know, literacy difficulties or we're looking at a dyslexic profile. Okay,
came up in
perfect.
the chapter as well, Caoimhe, just to
Oh,
see.
yeah.
They're
way ahead of me. Yeah. And I can't see
so,
the chat, so I'm just reinforcing everything said. Brilliant.
Greg said, reinforce the same. So is there a problem with, sorry, jumped there myself. Is there, a problem with memory and executive function? So brilliant. Indicator might be a student taking a long time to copy a word from the board, not recognizing a word that they've just studied.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so that's brilliant. If the learner has been in Ireland for 6 years and completed second level education, you may be able to access EOD to help with supports. So some strategies there available to Nala.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and Nala has a huge amount of resources available on the website that we can be using around here. I'm going to touch this one really, really quickly, okay? John's working with a new student, right, who literally discloses that they have dyslexia, you know, within seconds of meeting. Okay, John isn't sure of maybe any follow-up questions or what to do here. Is this something that you found that maybe within a few, you know, really quickly within meeting someone that say, I'm dyslexic, but they may not have ever had that formal identification. They may not have an educational psychologist report, but they're telling you that they're dyslexic. What would you do here? This one is something that if I'm literacy tutors, it comes up a bit. The same people telling me they're dyslexic, you know, and it's Hadn't coming in there, Leah.
Nothing yet. Ask the student what help they need.
Yeah, that's it. Sometimes, yeah, we're too kind of,
Ask, how can I help? Yeah.
yeah, brilliant. We're too hung up sometimes on, why isn't there an educational psychologist report? Where is it? Why do you think you're dyslexic? All of this, right? Let's trust in what they're saying to us. They're disclosing this for a reason, right? And sometimes it's self-preservation. Sometimes it's easier to say I have dyslexia than I've missed a huge chunk of primary school. You know, sometimes there's a lot of stigma around, well, why weren't you in primary school? You know, and in Ireland, we just assume that everybody has had equal access to education, right? So again, be very mindful. Let's not question too much into why this individual has identified with dyslexia, is disclosing to us. Let's support them. And it's like what you're saying, those follow-ups should be, yeah, how can we support you? You know, what has worked for you maybe? What hasn't worked for you? Because we don't want to replicate what hasn't worked for somebody at the same time. So yeah, fantastic. I love that people aren't necessarily honing in on that dyslexia identification. They're looking, okay, students told us this for a reason, so let's see how we can support them.
A lot of that there, Caoimhe, yeah, opening the conversation, acknowledging the disclosure. It's important for John to feel heard. Thank them for disclosing, ask them how they like to work in their learning, what they're hoping to do with you, and just acknowledge and open the conversation is the feedback in the chat.
Ah, fantastic.
Yeah,
brilliant. Okay, love that. Now what I'm going to ask you to do is go back into Mentimeter, right? And here's a new code I generated. And now when we think of dyslexia, what comes to mind? Okay. And again, it's the first thing that pops into your mind, no right or wrong. And if what maybe you've put in the very first Mentimeter, if it hasn't changed, that is okay. Yeah, just want to see where we're at now. So I'm going to stop sharing this and pull up our Mentimeter. Hopefully it works now for me. Okay, give me 1 minute. You can start typing there and I'll start. Perfect. Okay. Can see things popping in now. Okay, I love that. You're strong. Yeah, dyslexic individuals. Yeah, mentally strong, internally strong, and resilient. A difference. Yeah, being aware. Yeah, problem solving. Help, challenging. Being open. Love that. Yeah, identify, not disclose. Yeah, personally, yeah, love that one. Misunderstood. Sometimes, yeah, they can be misunderstood. And when we've seen that with Keith's poem. There's another one, sorry, they keep popping around. There was one that I was going, oh yeah, I must highlight that. There was one difficulty. Did I see that somewhere? Yeah, difficulty. And this is, we're not saying let's change the whole script and let's just look at all the strengths and the abilities the dyslexic individual has. Remember, we need to have that open, balanced conversation when we don't want people giving them a false sense of this bed of roses, and we call it the toxic positivity. Sometimes it's not always helpful, and we have to be open and honest. It can be hard being dyslexic, and like when you're saying you misunderstood, get wasted time. I'm hoping I'm picking this up right, but it's that idea that because maybe we've been told that we're stupid and we're not good enough and we didn't maybe excel or reach our potential in the educational system through no fault of the dyslexic individuals, it's not their fault, but because of a lack of awareness and supports and identification. And then there's a huge amount of time where somebody has maybe wasted in not reaching their potential and not being able to raise their self-esteem and confidence. Yeah. And we had that recently. We delivered a webinar last week, And there was actually a few people, and they were saying it wasn't until I was identified. One lady said she was in her 50s when she was identified, and following that identification, she went back to college, and she's now currently studying for her master's. But it was that identification that allowed her that opportunity to say, no, hang on, I am teachable, I can do this, and I can go back and study what I always wanted to be. And then following on from when she was talking, two other people were the same. They were saying following their identification in their 40s and 50s as well, they went back to education. So when we're thinking about, you know, identification, it's really important. Openness and awareness, different, and it's complex. You're right. Yeah, no two people are going to present the same. You know, we can't look and say, well, our student last week, you know, this was, you know, she could do A, B, and C. She hated D and E. So these must be the same for my student today. No, everybody's different. So let's have that open, honest conversation with someone to see where their strengths lie, where their difficulties lie, what supports work for them, how I can help them. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing there. I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'm going to just check. My last slide was just yeah, it was just any questions, and I know probably been shot here, and I've gone way over time, so thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. But as we mentioned, time management and dyslexia doesn't always go hand in hand, so you'll forgive me. But I'm just wondering, has anybody got any questions, any comments, anything like that you would like to share at this point?
Caoimhe, it's Noreen here. Can I just ask, are you going to give us kind of tips for delivering stuff? You know, like even a tip on the font, and you know, different kind of tips. I would like it that we can use.
I had sent over some resources and our slides to Fergus. So there is the style guides, you know, around tips around font, making all of our documents accessible. Are you thinking about maybe tips around, let's say, reading, gaining fluency, speech, vocabulary, and things like that? I can send over some tips like that if you'd like them as well.
Yeah, anything that would just be useful if we're delivering education, that, you know, just things that make it easier for people so that they don't feel overwhelmed, or just anything that makes it easier at all.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I can send over some of those
tips.
Can
I just jump in there as well? Sorry if that's okay. Fergus, is it okay if we pause recording just in case there's a personal question that comes up?
Okay, good
okay?
point. Yeah, thanks a million. Hold on a second.
And things like that, so that can be really helpful. And